Okay. Welcome to the June 18th, 2026 Division of Adult Education Monthly Webinar. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of the session. No other recording of this session is allowed. This includes any AI note-taking software or tools that you may have. So if you have that turned on, please turn it off. So three main areas. I don't think I will need the whole time, so might be able to give you a little bit of time back in your day today. So I think probably those of you who use CASAS and TABE online computer-based testing probably already know this because the vendors may have already reached out to you. But earlier this year, CASAS reached out to me and asked about doing statewide pricing for their assessments, specifically the computer-based TOPS Pro Enhanced Unit. And that was really the first time I'd ever heard of that option. I know that there are a lot of states that actually do a procurement and they purchase the same test and they make everyone in the state use the same test. Pennsylvania doesn't do that. But they explained to me that this was just a way that they could establish a price that all agencies in the state who were using this particular CASAS TOPS Pro could pay regardless of the number of administrations they were purchasing. When I found out about that, I also reached out to DRC, the owner of TABE, and it turned out they had something similar. So now both the CASAS and the TABE, so the CASAS tests, that whole series of them, and then the TABE 1314, both have some kind of statewide pricing. Now, this is not something that I negotiated with them, right? They established it, I think, based on overall usage of their particular assessments in the state. The prices are there on the screen. There are no discounts for paper-based. It is only these computer-based ones. And there may be, based on the vendors, there may be other restrictions or limitations. So if this is something that you're interested in, you'll want to reach out to the vendors for specifics. But it is available, and hopefully, especially for the smaller programs, that will end up being a little bit of a price savings for you. This is just an FYI. HiSET, well, ETS, PSI is increasing the price of the HiSET exam effective July 1st. Actually, they increased it in several states back in April, so we got them to put it off until July 1st. What that's going to do is increase the cost of a subtest from $15 to $18, so a $3 increase per subtest. And then the additional charge per subtest for the test at home option is going to increase from $17.50 to $23. At this point, the test fee subsidy process is going to remain the same from the Commonwealth's perspective. So, students should be able to have the entire cost covered for one full battery of the test as before. I guess, are there any questions so far? No, okay. I will keep going then. Oops. So I want to provide some updates around the barriers to employment, which are on the adult intake form, the adult student intake form. So as a reminder, these barriers to employment are categories that are listed in WIOA. Right? So WIOA says, here are categories of barriers to employment, individuals with barriers to employment. And we, as a state, we are required to report on the performance measures for each of those categories. So we report on overall measurable skill gain, employment, median wage, credential attainment. So we have statewide performance, but then on the performance report, we have to report on all of those 5 performance areas for each one of these subsets of individuals with barriers to employment. So it is important to collect it completely and accurately. The other thing to keep in mind is that these categories, or the numbers of individuals that are in these categories, is used in the statistical adjustment model that Octave uses when they are looking at our state's performance against our negotiated targets. And as a reminder, if we don't meet the targets, then there are potential sanctions. So again, it's important for programs to collect this information as completely and accurately as possible. So a couple of things. One, to support that, we worked with Michael at the eData Tech Support Project to revise the wording to hopefully make it more accessible to students and staff. So hopefully the information on the intake form will be a little bit easier to understand while also still kind of accurately providing the definition of that category. Also, earlier this year, state directors got some updated and additional guidance from Octave around documenting students' barriers to employment. And I think all of the state directors kind of agree that this is a change from prior guidance. So what they are saying, they believe that states and therefore local programs, that we're underreporting barriers to employment, because they said nationwide, the data are showing that only about 25% of students in adult education have one of the barriers to employment, with the exception of the basic skills deficient, cultural differences, low literacy, which of course all adult education people are kind of automatically put into that category. So you have to mark yes for that. But for the other categories, such as low income, single parent, homeless, justice involved, I don't have them all memorized at this point, but they feel like those are probably being underreported given the population that adult education serves. And so they're saying now that if the individual has the characteristic, that you should work with the student and mark yes for that characteristic, even if the student doesn't feel like that is actually preventing them from getting employment, right? So an individual who's homeless might be like, yeah, so I work for my buddy and I get paid, so being homeless isn't affecting my ability to get a job. But it is nonetheless a barrier to employment, right? Because if you don't have an address, a lot of employers, you can't even fill out their application form, type things like that. So that is one new piece of guidance, is that, as you're working with the student, if they say, yes, this particular category, I fall into this category, you don't have to say, well, do you think that's preventing you from getting a job or anything? You can just kind of select yes. Now, it is still, you don't have to interrogate the students to get an answer to it. If they say no, then they say no. If you find out later that at intake, the student actually did fall into that category, you can update it in eData and on the intake form. So you're not, if a student doesn't feel comfortable sharing that information, that's okay. But if they do share the information, you don't have to go into a conversation of whether or not they think it's preventing them from getting a job. It's kind of like if they say, yes, I'm homeless, or yes, I'm low income, or yes, I'm a single parent, just put yes, select yes. Another change, and this is across the WIOA programs, the federal government, the DOL and DOE have revised the definition of long-term unemployed. So previously, it was only if they had been unemployed for 27 or more consecutive weeks. It is now 27 or more consecutive weeks, or 27 or more non-consecutive weeks within the past 12 months. So just the definitions change. And then they also clarified for us that there are some categories, some barriers to employment categories that are also included within the definition of low income. Two of the specific ones are, if an individual is homeless, then being homeless is part of the definition. The definition of low income says if the individual's homeless, they're low income. Same if they're a runaway youth, if they're a youth in foster care or a youth who has aged out of the foster care system, they are included in the definition of low income. So if somebody indicates that they're homeless, you would indicate yes, and then you would also indicate that they're low income on the form and enter yes in eData. We will not be changing the system to kind of automatically select low income if you select homeless. Some of the state directors asked Octay about setting up systems like that, and Octay said, no, you should not do that. So you'll need to make sure it's on the intake form and then make sure it's entered that way. So a question has come up, I think a lot, especially when agencies get incentive funds around, addressing students' transportation barriers, because we know that transportation is a huge barrier for a lot of our students to be able to successfully attend services, getting to your site to do assessment, getting to your site to attend classes, things like that. So we wanted to clarify a couple of things. One, it is an allowable expense, but only the amount that is specific to attending program activities. So what that means, like down at the bottom of the slide where I have things that are not allowable, those things are not allowable because you can't limit them, right? So if you give somebody a gas card for $25, they're going to put gas in their car, and they use their car for things other than coming to class. So that gas card is not allowable with our funds. Now, if you have other local funds that you want to use for that, that's fine. I can't be local match, but you can do that. But you cannot use our grant funds to, say, buy a gas card. You can't even use it to like take them to the gas station to fill up, right? Because you can't control where they're going to drive their car. Like, you can only use this card to drive to and from class. Not going to work. So you can't just buy a gas card or fill somebody's gas tank up with grant funds. Something like a monthly bus pass or, an unlimited metro rail. Again, you can't purchase that and give it to the student because they could use it for things other than accessing services. Same with kind of a monthly parking. Now, if your agency has purchased monthly parking for staff and a staff member isn't there and you want to allow a student to park in that space, that's a different type of thing. But you can't just say, we have 5 monthly parking spaces for students because it could then potentially be used for other things. But there are cases where you can use it. So, if you, and given the way people pay for buses and tokens, et cetera, nowadays, it's a little harder. But, you can cover the cost of a bus ride to and from the student's home to your site. If there's if you can help students cover the cost of parking for the amount of time that they're at your program for something. Those, as long as you can document it and document it that it was the specific time for being at your program to access your services, that would be allowable. I would advise then, yes, so that's kind of what I just mentioned. So if you have a single use bus pass, right? So the person gets on, they use the bus and it's not good anymore, and they show up at your class, yes, that's allowable. I do think you would want to have some kind of policy and procedure in your program to ensure consistent provision of the support, right? You don't want to get into a situation where you have students who are perceiving like, oh, you support this person to do this, this, and this, and you give them money to do this, this, and this, but you didn't do it for me, right? So, we're not going to have you submit that policy or anything to us, but you probably want to think about having something kind of written policy procedure that everyone follows so that you are applying things consistently and can't be accused of favoring or bias or anything like that. We would encourage you to organize student carpools. Sometimes students don't think of that, but if there's a way to support them to travel together, that's another option. And then this next slide is something that Shelley in my office, the advisor, Shelley told me about. So apparently the rideshare companies, Uber, Lyft, and maybe there are some others that I'm not familiar with, they actually have like formal voucher programs in which you can actually budget a certain amount towards transportation. You can specify the date, the location, time of use. They can only use it to get to your class, to get to a class site or wherever they're taking the test. You can budget for it. You can track the usage. I don't have the details. We can't be seen as promoting certain vendors over others. So if you are interested in it, you can contact the vendors. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Shelley so she can talk a little bit about it, how she used it when she was at a local board down in Maryland.
Thanks, Amanda. So I was deputy director of a workforce board in Maryland, and we ran an adult program as well as an out-of-school youth program. And we used the Uber, but as Amanda said, we can't promote one over the other or any others that may be out there. But what I did was we would schedule rides for students to get back and forth to class. And to, assessments and orientations and such. And you can do it. It's really great because most of the rideshare programs offer courtesy ride programs through their free business portals. So it's easy to set up. It's free to use. You just pay for the rides and only the rides that are taken. So if you give somebody an Uber voucher for $50 that can only be used to go to your restricted locations on specific days and times and only to specific people. If they don't use the rides, you don't pay for them. You can also arrange individual rides. So you can schedule pickup John Johnson at his home at this address at this time, drive him to this location at our agency for his 11 o'clock class, and then pick him up at 1 o'clock and take him back to this address. So you can be very, very specific, and it's only for that person. It's really a cost-effective way to help students address transportation barriers, but it should be used as a short-term solution until a long-term solution is identified and put in place. You don't want them to become reliant on you to address that barrier for them indefinitely. Your student support coordinator should be helping them to identify a long-term solution. But what I liked about it was so easy to schedule, but also you could run reports on You can get every ride that was taken for a 30-day period. You can click on each individual ride to see who was picked up when and if the ride was completed. And again, you only pay for the rides that you use. It also integrates with Salesforce and SAP Concur. So you can do expense code tracking, you can do custom building, you can do reporting. While we can't promote any individual rideshare program, I really do, like Amanda suggested, do your research and just know that there are platforms out there that can help you address your student transportation barrier needs. Thanks, Amanda.
Sure, thank you. And as a reminder, if you do something like this, any type of expenditures associated with supporting transportation or any student support has to go in 2160 barrier support, right? Even though it's to attend instruction, it's not an instructional cost. It's a student support, barrier student support expenditure. So you can use the funds, but it goes in 2160. Okay. So continuous program improvement. Right? We talk about continuous program improvement. They're in the guidelines. All programs are supposed to be doing continuous program improvement. All programs are required to have a program improvement team. This includes subgrantees, right? And the point is that you're focusing on getting better. It's not necessarily that you're bad at something, but our targets keep increasing at the federal level. If you're not at 100% measurable skill gain, you can continue to improve, right? So the idea is there's continuous program improvement. All programs, all grantees and sub-grantees must be engaged in continuous program improvement. You have a program improvement team. The work should be data-driven. And it's open, right? There, you may address program policies and procedures and processes. You may look at something and say, hey, we looked at X, Y, and Z, and we realized, that we have a couple extra steps in here that we think are a barrier to students, and we're going to try and figure out a way to do that more efficiently. It can also be looking at services and how improving instructions, student support, and there may be other areas that you want to look at for improving. But the idea of continuous program improvement is there. You should always be working on improving your programs. Now, there are very specific types of plans that programs must or might be required to do depending on the type of plan, right? So we have the PIPD plan, the Program Improvement Professional Development Plan, which you should be working on right now. So a PIPD plan is in support of continuous improvement that involves professional development, right? So not all program improvement necessarily involves professional development, but your PIPD plan is what kind of improvement, what kind of continuous improvement are we looking for that will be informed and supported by professional development. All entities receiving funding from the division must have PIPD plans and implement them, including subgrantees. Now, currently, for programs that are a consortium, so a main grantee with subgrantees, we allow you to determine locally, are you going to work together and have a single PIPD plan that integrates both the main grantee and subgrantees? Or is the main grantee and the subgrantee going to have their own PIPD plan? We allow you to decide that, but everybody has to do it. So if you're a small program and you're a subgrantee, thinking, oh, I don't have to worry about that because I'm not a main grantee. That's not the case. You are expected to have a PIPD plan. It will, and you should be, it doesn't have to be part of the main grantee's PIPD plan, but there needs to be coordination around getting it submitted and meeting with your advisor and discussing it and the consultant and things like that. A PIPD plan, like this isn't like the full menu of everything that you would like to see happen in the next year, right? The PIPD plans are one or two objectives that you are truly focusing on that is going to be supported by professional development, right? I understand that some of you are looking and thinking we can improve here and we can improve here and we can do this better and we can do that better. That's great. But if you do a whole bunch of things, nothing's going to get better because you're going to spread yourself really thin. So when you're doing that PIPD plan, you really need to be focusing on one or two objectives for the PIPD plan for the year. But as I said, there may be a program improvement activity that isn't going to involve professional development, right? So you might take a look at your student handbook and realize as you're reading it, like, wow, there's a lot of like passive voice in here, and it's written at a 10th grade reading level, and we repeat things, and right, you don't need professional development to improve your student handbook, right? You can still take time and improve your student handbook as program improvement, but not included on the PIPD plan. But at the same time, you don't want to be working on like 20 different things, especially if you're a fairly small program with a small staff, right? So a larger program with more staffing, with maybe more focused teams might be able to engage in more program improvement than a small program. But you want to make sure that staff can really focus on your area of improvement and not spread them thin over many different areas. Okay. Then we have corrective action plans, CAPs. These address non-compliance. So these aren't associated with quality. These are non-compliance. They are things that should be addressed immediately to fix them so that you are in compliance. They usually come from monitoring reviews. However, we do have the authority to impose them for other things. If we identify things outside of a monitoring review, we say, you're not doing this, you need to have a plan to fix it. Now, we have some agencies that have been working on corrective action plans for extended periods of time. And so next year, 26, 27, we will be implementing a 180 calendar day timeframe in which to complete your corrective action plan and provide evidence that everything has been addressed. So just giving folks a heads up on that. But the corrective action plan is you're not doing something that you're supposed to be doing, or you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, or you're doing something incorrectly and you need to fix it, right? It's compliance. You're not doing something that you should be. You're doing something you shouldn't be. Fix it, get it done. The program performance improvement plan. So we first did something like this. We didn't call it a program performance improvement plan, but back in so at the end of the 18-19 program year, we identified a lot of programs that weren't meeting contracted enrollment. They were not showing progress towards meeting the measurable skill gains target. And we required programs to develop action plans about how they were going to address those in the following program year in 1920. And the plan was to have additional consequences in follow-up years. Because if you're not meeting contracted enrollment, if you're consistently not meeting measurable skill gains, there need to be implications for that, right? It's taxpayer money. It has to be used for what it's used for. And if you can't do what you're expected to do, maybe you shouldn't be getting taxpayer money. So we are re-implementing this, right? We got hit with the pandemic. A lot of programs were doing a really good job in the 1920 program year based on their the action plans to address enrollment or EFL gain back then. And then the pandemic hit, right? And so the division was just kind of like, okay, do your programs, do what you can do, serve the people that you can serve, let's just get through this. And we've gotten through it. The advisors have been talking to program contacts about performance, about progress towards contracted enrollment. You had the data awareness campaign to look at your data. We have some programs that are consistently failing to meet expectations. So we are again implementing the program performance improvement plan, and those are to address failure to meet enrollment and performance targets and standards. We're giving you a chance. We're going to provide technical assistance to succeed. If you don't, there are potential funding implications in future years. So, advisors have been getting calls from people saying, oh my gosh, are we going to get a PIP? I will be sending out official notification sometime in the next couple of weeks, but I did think I would share with you the general criteria, which should allow people to get a sense of whether or not they might be getting a PIP or more than one PIP. So we did recognize, so the idea originally was to have it be using year-to-date data from the given program year. We recognize that the beginning of this the 25-26 program year was a little crazy, and it was very challenging for programs. So we thought, okay, well, we can't just use 25-26 data. Although I want to say at this point that I am very impressed with what you all have been able to do, given the very challenging start to this program year, and also the impact that some national level decisions have had on student populations, things like that. I think Pennsylvania overall is doing very well given these challenges. So thank you for that. It's also the reason we chose not to just use this year's data, because things happen and we didn't think it would be fair. So 23-24 and 24-25, however, were fairly stable years, right? We were past the pandemic, federal funds flowed without many issues, and the state budget passed in a fairly normal time frame. So for 26-27 program performance improvement plans, we have decided to look at agencies' 3-year trends. It is by grant, and we are focusing on enrollment and measurable skill gains. So, criteria, 3-year trends. The thresholds for 23-24 and 24-25, those years are complete, had to meet contracted enrollment. So if you were below 100% of enrollment, that kind of got highlighted in red on my little spreadsheet. For year-to-date enrollment, we pulled the data on May 18th. Given that we give you 14 days to enter data, I kind of said, okay, we will have expected that all data for all services provided through the end of April should be in eData as of the 15th. That's about 83% of the way through the year. So we set the threshold for enrollment at 83% for year to date. Then looking at agencies' measurable skill gains, the Pennsylvania's target with Octave was 36%. So if your measurable skill gain on a particular grant was below 36%, you got highlighted in red. 24-25, our target was 37%. So again, if it was below 37%, you got highlighted in red. And then looking at year-to-date measurable skill gain, again, I took a percentage of the year, which is if year-to-date as of 5/18, you were below 32%, you got highlighted, right? So we're looking at trends, right? So if there's one red in that whole series, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a PIP. But what I can tell you is if you didn't meet contracted enrollment in 23-24, 24-25, and you're not on track to meet it, you're going to get a PIP for enrollment for that grant. If you have more than one grant and you haven't met contracted enrollment on more than one grant, you're going to have more than one PIP. Same thing with measurable skill gains. If you're not meeting measurable skill gains consistently, you will have a PIP. If you have more than one grant, you'll have more than one PIP. So I'm not going to say right now who's getting it and who's not. I'm not going to do that on a recorded webinar. But given these criteria, I think you should be able to go look at your data and figure out whether or not you might be getting a PIP. Now, some of you are in kind of a gray area. If you think you're in a gray area, here's what I suggest. Even if you don't have a PIP, you need to improve, right? So, and finally, just because you don't have a PIP for next year does not mean that you don't have to do continuous program improvement, right? Because as a state, our targets keep increasing. So thank you to those of you who are meeting contracted enrollment and who are exceeding measurable skill gains. I truly appreciate that. You have more flexibility in figuring out what you're going to address, but you do still need to do continuous program improvement. That's kind of part of your PIPD plan. How are you going to continue to improve your services so that we as a state can continue to improve?
Amanda, we have one question in the chat. Will MSGs include HSEs for 24-25 and 25-26?
Yes, the 24-25 final data, which is posted to the PDE website, includes high school equivalency subtests. And the year-to-date, Heather is including high school equivalency subtests, as well as if you happen to have submitted post-secondary enrollment forms and it happened within the program year, we're including that as well. Okay. That's the last slide. I know that we had people asking questions, so and take a look at your data and see how you think you're doing, and you'll have a sense. As I said, like if there's one, if you were good for everything except for 1 year, you were low in one area, you're probably not getting a PIP, but I can't guarantee. But if you're consistently not meeting expectations, you will have PIPs.
There's another question. Will MSGs after 5/18 count?
What?
The question is, will MSGs that are made after May 18th count?
No. We pulled data, it's data that was in as of 5. Now, what I'm telling you, that's for this decision making. No, we pulled data as of 5/18 and it was what was in the system as of 5/18. Now, when it comes to your final performance data, yes, when final performance data that we actually post and say this is what your final performance was, yes, we'll include all of your students that are entered in eData before July 15th and all of the post-testing and things like that. But no, we pulled data on, as I said earlier in the year, we would be pulling data in the middle of May, and that's what we would be using. So. Also, that was again kind of the thing why we're not going only with this year to date, right? We're looking at 3-year trends. So it's not just your MSG this year to date. Thank you all very much. I hope you have a good rest of the program year. As a reminder, it ends in a couple of weeks. You've got until it's through July 15th to get all of your data into eData. Hope you all have a very happy Juneteenth and July 4th.
Amanda, this is Lori from Goodwill. Are there plans for kickoff? Do we know what we're going to be working on this year?
There is a planning process. I believe I sent out something that at least gave you the heads up on dates. Did I not send that out?
Yes, I just wanted to know if we knew what we were focusing on.
We're working on that right now.
Okay.
I don't want to preempt the planning that the advisors are doing, and provide information that I haven't confirmed with them. Well, thank you all very much. I can stay on if there are a couple more questions, but otherwise, thank you all very much. You're welcome to get a few more minutes in your day.